start out by just introducing everyone to the UCANR Fire Network. We're a collection of fire and natural resources advisors, specialists, and staff committed to deliver fire-related research, outreach, and support for communities across California. I do want to encourage you all to take a moment to visit our website to learn more about us and the resources that we offer, including our new smoke readiness fact sheet that inspired this webinar tonight. That also summarizes some of the information that you'll be learning here and linking to several resources that I'm sure that our speakers will mention. I'm Allison Deek. I'm a fire advisor with the Fire Network. I'm here with a few of my colleagues, Cleo, Barb, and Katie, who are also fire advisors and the coordinator for our statewide fire network. Yeah, so we have some great speakers lined up for this evening. We have Dr. Eric Surjenko first, presenting on the public health impacts of smoke, followed by Tanya Garcia, presenting on how to interpret air quality index, and Amy McPherson presenting on how to protect yourself from smoke. Just so everyone understands the format of the meeting, each speaker will have about 20 to 25 minutes to give their presentation. There'll be a little bit of time for questions after each presentation, then some time at the very end for questions as well for all of our speakers. Before we get started, just some quick Zoom etiquette reminders. Please make sure to keep yourself muted and to save your questions for our presenters until they are finished presenting, or you can write them in the chat and we'll save them for the appropriate time. So before I introduce Dr. Eric, I just want to say that I know we're all ready for the end of fire season and some cooler weather. I know I am, but studies have shown that smoke cover is increasing in California, and some of our worst smoky days have historically been in September. So we're really hopeful that this webinar will help you all feel more prepared to deal with these future smoke events. So thank you all for being here. I'll hand it off to Dr. Eric Surjenko. Currently, Dr. Eric Surjenko is the medical director for adult correctional health for Sacramento County. He's formerly the health officer for Mariposa County, where I'm located, which is one of 2 counties in California where Air Pollution Control District resides within the health department. As such, he served as the air pollution control officer, and in this role, he worked with land management agencies on smoke management related to both prescribed and wildland fire. He is also still active as a volunteer firefighter with Mariposa County, serving as an engine boss as well as incident commander on small wildland fires, and participated in numerous prescribed fires, including low and medium complexity fires. And I have actually had the pleasure of being on prescribed fires with him, which is always a lot of fun. Eric, I will quit sharing my screen and let you take it away.
Okie doke. I will share mine. And let's see. Share screen. And we'll go with that guy. And you should be seeing my screen.
We got it.
All right, sweet. Well, thank you everyone for joining us tonight. Thanks to UCANR for hosting this. Just a quick introduction or a little bit more about me is, again, for the last 8 years, I've been up in Mariposa serving as both their health officer and air pollution control officer, and kind of a unique role of being able to do both of those at the same time. And in addition, being a volunteer firefighter, I've been a planning section chief in our county EOC. And then, as I would like to say, if you set the Wayback Machine really far back, I graduated from the College of Forestry at Oregon State University. And so in my role as the health officer, what I did was translate a lot of bench science, air pollution science, into actionable stuff during incidents, whether that was in a wildland fire or a prescribed fire. Just in case you want to delve deeper into this, there are 3 really excellent resources available to you. Not really heavy reading, but there's the National Wildland Fire Coordination Group Smoke Management Guide. That helps the wildland fire, the smoke practitioner, or the prescribed fire practitioner, if you will, in managing smoke. But it does have a section in Chapter 2 on health impacts. And then there are 2 wildland fire guides for public health folks. One is the National Guide, the Wildfire Smoke Guide for Public Officials, and there's one that's specifically for California, the wildfire smoke. Both of those are recent, 21 and 22, so available to you if you want to delve deeper. Another thing I find useful is the EPA has a smoke-ready toolbox for wildfires. That should be available to you. The link is right there at the bottom of the slide. And then finally, one of the last things I want to mention is it's a relatively new app. I think Amy will go into it further, which is the California Smoke Spotter. So I'll leave that to her. And what we'll do is, talk a little bit about smoke, but it's important to know that wildland fire smoke is just part of the milieu of air pollutants that we swim through on a daily basis. As we look at the impacts of wildfire smoke, it's important to consider all the other things that are confounding there, all these air pollution, whether it's from industrial autos. It has some of the same components that occur in wildland fire smoke, but it also has other components. So it's important to know that you've got these things that are all mingling together. And I think it's important to look at some notable examples of air pollution. And really the most egregious example is the London smog of 1952. And this is what happens when you get a really strong inversion layer. The inversion layer that formed during an anticyclone, it traps sulfur dioxide in a layer very close to the ground, limiting visibility. And so it was dangerous to move not only out of doors, but indoors and also inhaling the air. So they had people that were suffering trauma and suffering medical problems. And so during this 5-day episode, over 12,000 people died of trauma and medical emergencies. Presently, 7 out of 10 cities in the United States with the highest levels of ozone emission are right here in California, and most are in the Central Valley, the San Joaquin Valley. And even in LA, despite a massive reduction in point source pollution, there's still an ongoing burden of disease secondary to air pollution. As an example, asthma exacerbated by outdoor air quality leads a statistically significant increase in the numbers of days schools missed and trips to the emergency department amongst kids. And then looking at health impacts of air pollution, it's like 64,000 people in the United States die prematurely from heart and lung disease. And then, as we know, with increased air pollution, we get increased asthma. And so that's a staggering thing as we look at the impacts of just air pollution. But if we shift to the health effects of wildland fire, they are similar to other air pollutants. The smoke is an irritant to the eyes, the respiratory tract, all the way down into the lungs. Irritation of the lungs can lead to bronchospasm with resultant visits to the emergency department and hospital stays. The increased work of breathing also can create increased work for the heart, which increases the likelihood of those with existing disease of having a cardiac arrest outside of the hospital. Bottom line is that smoke can increase the risk of death when the levels of particulate matter is high enough. So shifting a little bit to prescribed fires, is we know that with anthropogenic climate change, we're going to see more drought years in California. This has made our fire season almost year-round. We have continued catastrophic fires coming through the fall, almost into the winter months. So in order to restore forest health and reduce the fuel load associated with a century plus of fire suppression, we're talking a lot about using prescribed fire. And we're broadly advocating for that, trading those mega fires that we see with 200,000, 400,000 acres into more frequent, lower intensity and less impactful prescribed fires. So then the question comes up, is prescribed burns different than other wildland fires? Because you're still producing particulate matter. Is it really better? So some studies done out of UC Merced by Schweitzer and Cisneros showed, specifically in the line fire, that what you were doing is you would have the same impacts locally, but there would be less transport of these dangerous stuff to areas that were further away. And because of that decreased transport of particulate matter, there's less impact on the larger community. And then by doing smaller, more frequent fires, you're exposing people to a shorter period of smoke while no longer pushing that burden of catastrophic fire into future generations. So we've talked in general about the health impacts of air pollutants. We've talked about a little bit about wildland fire smoke, a little bit about prescribed fire smoke. And then seeing that prescribed fire is part of a larger mix of pollutants, let's do a little bit of a deeper dive into the constituents of smoke, which include particulate matter, the aldehydes and organic compounds, and then carbon monoxide. And then we'll take a little bit of switch and then see how those components impact your body. So particulate matter are the products of combustion that are transported in the air, and then individually they're too small to see, but collectively they make up the haze we refer to as smoke. Although it's a spectrum, we classify particles based on size. Coarse particles are those that are between 2.5 to 10 microns, about a fifth to a tenth of the width of a human hair. Fine particles are those that are 1 to 2.5 microns, about 20 times smaller than the width of a human hair. And then there are ultrafine particles. They're not shown on this drawing. Those are the ones that are smaller than a micron. And really only in the last decade have we learned about the impacts that they have on human health. So fine and ultrafine particles make up most of wildland fire smoke, about 90% of it. They settle out more slowly and travel further than the coarse particles. And because of their size, they also travel deeper down into the lungs and cause more damage. Fine particles, referred to shorthand as PM 2.5, I'm sure you're going to hear more about that tonight. These are the main focus of regulation and monitoring, largely due to existing technology and the ability to measure PM 2.5 versus ultrafine particles, or UFPs as they're known. That said, UFPs are of interest, and the science on that is growing. So regardless of whether it's a suppression fire, prescribed fire, wildland fire, the material from the smoke needs to enter your body to cause problems. And this is most likely occurring through inhalation, coming down through your nose, your mouth, down into the larynx, down into the lungs. And as you can see on that scale on the side, it's really those smaller particles, the fine particles and ultrafine particles, that settle all the way down into the bases of your lungs. The stuff that you're inhaling is a heterogeneous mixture, and what's in that stuff varies on what's being burned. We know that wet or green vegetation burns differently than dead or dry, that hardwoods produce different chemical species than softwoods. Different fires at different stages of combustion produce different chemical profiles. And so knowing what's burning and how it's burning can help you determine what the real hazards are. And so we'll go into those specific hazards a little bit more in detail. There are several chemical species that we look at: aldehydes, aromatic hydrocarbons, or PAHs, carbon monoxide, and ozone generation through nitrogen oxides. I'm not going to dwell on these, but just knowing that they're out there, that in general, their short-term effects is impacting exposed tissue. So whether that's tearing in the eyes, nausea and vomiting from active means, then there's the longer-term exposures, things like chronic respiratory disease or cancer. With formaldehydes, same sort of irritant qualities, but the risk long-term with this is nasal and nasopharyngeal cancer. With benzene, it's an aromatic hydrocarbon, so it hangs around a little bit longer. Similar short-term symptoms, but as we have that persistence, it can lead to cancers, anemia, and liver and kidney damage. The polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, multiple aromatic rings, sort of like a bunch of benzenes linked together, if you will. Your speciation varies based upon the fire intensity. And what we are concerned about with these PAHs is that they can lead to oxidative stress. That oxidative stress can cause cardiovascular disease, can cause you to have a heart attack. Just some general rules about this: higher wood combustion temperatures appear to yield more of those PAHs, and particularly the oxy-PHS and quinones, which are implicated in that oxidative stress that leads to free radical generation and tissue damage. Particulate that's collected during wildfire events seem to have more oxidative potential than what we get from the urban environment. And we may have more generation of free radicals and more oxidative stress, again, associated with that. Another species we look at is carbon monoxide. Typically, this causes headache, dizziness, nausea, impaired mental function. Most often, the body will recover from short-term exposure during those smoke-free periods. But what we've learned over the last 3 or 4 decades is there is always long-term neurocognitive sequelae, and that can be accumulated. In higher concentrations, this can actually cause death. And then nitrogen oxides, volatile organic compounds, that leads to generation of ozone, Ozone leads to oxidative stress that causes what's called lipid peroxidation, which causes inflammation and proliferation of the lungs and other body sites. That causes DNA damage, causes mitochondrial damage, so that can lead to organ failure and ongoing disease, whether it's the lungs, the heart, or the brain. We're going to talk about all those in just the next couple of slides. In the United States, we get about 4,000 to 6,000 respiratory hospitalizations due to short-term smoke exposures, whether that's asthma or COPD exacerbation. There is a strong evidence linking that smoke exposure to those exacerbations, increased use of medications, and increased visits to the emergency department. There's also growing evidence of other respiratory outcomes that occur within days after smoke exposure, whether that's things like infections like bronchitis, pneumonia, or upper respiratory infections like colds. There's also data that's increasing over time that we're showing an increased incidence of out-of-hospital cardiac arrests. And we're also seeing increased admissions for cardiac disease. And those are relatively new, but there is an increased disease association with increased PM2.5 production regardless of the source. Likely what that translates to do is about 2,000 to 3,000 cardiovascular hospitalizations in the United States due to wildland fire smoke. Neurologically, and this is relatively new science, is that as we understand more about those ultrafine particles, we will attribute more problems with those UFPs with neurological disease, because the UFPs sort of pass through the alveoli, get into the bloodstream, travel to the brain, and increase the risk of stroke and the risk of dementia. Again, kind of thinking about this as a visual, is the coarse particles get trapped in the upper respiratory system. They cause local irritation, cause the tearing, cause the mucus production. The finer particles travel into the lower respiratory system, bronchitis, other problems like that. The ultrafine particles travel through the alveoli, causing heart and lung problems. And then those long-term volatile organic compounds lead to things like cancer, increased lipid peroxidation, et cetera. So those are kind of the concerns by organ, but we also want to be concerned about some people that are in our population. Some persons are at greater risk of being impacted by wildland smoke than others. In particular, we look at these people is kids and asthma, we already talked about. With the elderly, they have decreased lung capacity just simply due to aging. With people who are pregnant, you're carrying around a fetus in your body for about 9 months. And so that exposes that fetus to toxins, including wildland fire production of smoke. And then as you get further along in the pregnancy, you're losing lung capacity. So you're having more trapping of particulate matter in your lungs till you simply can't move it out. And then if you have a pre-existing lung condition, asthma, COPD, or pre-existing heart problems, that sets you up for increased risk as well. The other population that I want to briefly touch on is firefighters in the prescribed environment, knowing that we're talking to people that may be interested in that, is that typically during a prescribed fire, a firefighter is more exposed to carbon monoxide and particulate matter than similar firefighters in a wildland fire setting. If we look at this, again, maximum observed levels in that prescribed fire, 11% of the population, essentially the same as you would see in a wildland fire in this study. And then here, aside from attack in the work activity in a prescribed fire, we're seeing people that are exposed to significant amounts in the holding and supervisor positions. So again, as we think about prescribed fire as well, we want to reduce the risk, have firefighters getting out of the smoke, rotating that exposure, so they're minimizing their risk. And that's where I'll end it and hand it over to Amy, I think it is, to talk about how to assess all that smoke that's being produced. And I will end my slideshow.
Thank you so much, Eric, our Dr. Surjanko. I will actually pass it to Cleo, and he's going to introduce Tanya Garcia.
I'm not sure if Cleo's still on the line, but I can definitely introduce myself if that is helpful to move things on.
Yeah, sorry about that, folks.
No, no worries.
We have,
Go for
go
it.
ahead. I'll let you introduce yourself. You know more about you than I do.
About me, yeah. Um, Hi. Yes, Cleo is currently at a prescribed burn. Ooh, is my internet okay? Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
we can hear
Yes.
you.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah, my name's Tanya Garcia. I'm a research engineer at the Shots Energy Research Center. We're a research center located at Cal Poly Humboldt here in the Pacific Northwest, really North California. I've been doing air quality research with the Karuk tribe for maybe about 4 years now. Um, and we've had a lot of grants related to air filtration and air sensors and monitoring. So I'm going to talk to you about interpreting air quality data. And so I will share my screen. Yes, and so my colleague Grayson Adams wasn't able to make it today. One of our partners, Sean Bork from the Karuk Department of Natural Resources, is here at the presentation right now. But I will get into interpreting air quality data. And so the things we're going to cover in the presentation are essentially the team and just a little bit of background about what projects we're working on now. We talked about prescribed fires, and I'll mention maybe why tribes may be interested or want to know about smoke and the use air sensors. Next, I'll talk about how to interpret air quality data and where folks can go to find this information. Lastly, we'll talk about how we know it's reliable and if it's something we want to take seriously. So just starting off, I mentioned that I've been working with the Karuk tribe for the last 4 years. Our projects have been focused on, or like our teams are the Shots Energy Research Center, which I mentioned we're a research center, does engineering, natural and social science resource assessment, lots of researches. The Karuk tribe, Department of Natural Resources, they are a group of government scientists and practitioners. They have a lot of expertise in fire and agro-ecocultural systems. Lots of, yeah, they do a lot of prescribed and cultural fires. And the Blue Grancheria is another tribe located on the coast who we partner with that have a lot of experience in energy resiliency, as well as tribal air. And so our project, what we've been working on is deploying these air sensors. And so why is this relevant to what we've been talking about? We just learned about smoke and those impacts and how those particulate matters, how they are in the air and how they can impact you. And so now this project, the point of it is we wanted to deploy 100 air sensors so that we can inform people of what the air quality is. And that way they can make those decisions if they think they should be outside or inside or essentially change their behaviors. We're also working on technical assistance and collaborating with community partners. And so here on the right is a map of the Badawat watershed, Mad River watershed where we're located, and the Klamath River watershed. And every single one of these purple dots on the plot are a sensor that is deployed. And this is an image from 2022. So we talked about, someone already spoke about firefighters and folks who are working on fire and why they might care, why we want to know about smoke. Here on the right, you can see we have a plot actually of a prescribed fire where we had on the left hand, you can see that someone is currently doing a prescribed burn, and so you can see some flames and some land being burned. We were able to install a sensor in a tree with a PV module, and we were able to collect data to get a better understanding of how much particulate matter was in the air, right? So we were just talking about how these folks are a group that are very much exposed to smoke and how there are health impacts because of that smoke. So it's our tribal partners are interested since they do this work to understand how much particulate matter. And so you can see that during the prescribed fire, the particulate matter was actually not in the red for the most part. There were some spikes, but the daily average was yellow and green. And that's just important to keep track of and know for when you're having people do this type of work. I've been mentioning these purple air sensors a lot. Probably should have introduced them first, but the way that we are able to understand what the air quality is that there's different technologies, and folks might use these technologies for different reasons. The technology on the left is called a purple air sensor. It's about the size of an apple. It's low cost. It's around $250. And those are what we purchased, about 100 of them, to deploy out into the community. And they can tell us what the air quality is, or what the PM 2.5 is. On the right side is a monitor. And so there are also monitors that differentiate from sensors. One, they're a lot more expensive. You can see that the one on the right is called an EBAM. It's portable. It's around $10,000. It can be more expensive than that. And the US government, when making decisions, they want to have data from a reference grade monitor, or something like what's on the right. However, depending on what you're doing, a low-cost sensor may be useful for you. And so we've been actually asking folks in the community who are interested in air quality if they would like to host an air sensor and connect one outside of their homes, so that they can be better informed with what the air quality is locally where they're living. Yes. Next, gain this understanding of like how to understand the air quality. The EPA and uses this framework that is based on color. So you can see in this table, there's AQI and there's also PM 2.5. And so in the previous presentation, we were talking about particulate or fine particulate matter. So here, that is the PM 2.5. When you are using different resources, another metric that you might see is AQI. And so these values, you can see they're not necessarily the same numbers, but there is a conversion factor. And I think the AQI is a lot easier for folks to understand. 0 to 50, 51 to 100, and so forth. And they also have these colors, right? We tend to think green is good, red is bad, yellow is eh. And so if we read these descriptions, you can see that green is air quality that is satisfactory, doesn't have a lot of pollution, and it poses little to no risk. Once you start to get to yellow, it's acceptable, but it may be risky to some people. And then orange, we have, yes, this is dangerous for sensitive groups. And in the last presentation, we thought about who those sensitive groups are: elders, folks with respiratory conditions, children, and also folks who are being exposed to these a lot, right? So luckily, different platforms are for the most part using this same color scheme. So you can understand that green is good, and as it gets more closer to red and purple and maroon, the air quality gets worse. And so in the work I've been doing, I have asthma, and so I was installing air sensors during a wildfire in 2021, and I had to wear a 95 outside the whole time because I got a headache. I was starting to wheeze. And the Karuk tribe, the community that we've been partnering and doing research with, their air quality during some wildfires sometimes is in the maroon. It was 800 AQI for almost 10 days straight. And so here is 301 and above. So you can imagine 800. It's really unhealthy. And it's not, yeah, negatively impacts everyone, including the animals, right? Not just people. But that's how you can understand the air quality index. And so sometimes you might see PM 2.5, and oftentimes you'll see AQI. PM 2.5 is typically more speaking academically, but AQI is more what I've seen out in the public for folks to understand. So now, where can y'all find this information? You're interested in knowing what the air quality is around you, and you want to know. So I mentioned the Purple Air apps, or the Purple Air devices. So one way to go to these Purple Air maps, and I can show live time what one looks like. So if you look at the screen right now, you can see there are a bunch of little dots or circles. Some of these have black outlines. Here's a good example. This one has a black outline and the color's green and it has 18. So if you click on that, this is telling you the AQI, right? So this is saying that the air quality, the AQI is 18 right now. And because it has a black outline, it means that this is an indoor sensor. So inside of this building right now, the air quality is good. We actually deployed the sensor and we also deployed one outside, which you can see is kind of yellow, but it's also kind of transparent, which means that it might not be giving the best reading right now. And you can see elsewhere in the community that other outdoor sensors are in the orange. So that means that right now in the community, the air quality is orange, so it's okay. It's probably harmful, you know, it might, some sensitive groups may be impacted. But if you're inside with air filtration, which I know this building has air filtration, the air quality may be okay. It's good, it's green. And so this is a website that I've used a lot and I recommend for folks, and I'm just zooming out for scale for y'all to see how many air sensors are out there and are being deployed right now. And so, like I mentioned in our project, we're working on deploying sensors in this community where there's less available compared to an urban city. You can see all of these dots, all of these circles. Another resource that you may want to use, and this one has an app on your phone. This one's called Watch Duty, and this displays wildfires as well as the purple air network we just looked at. The values do lag a little bit, so that's something to keep in mind. There's so much happening here. Let me zoom out so you know where we are. Right now, we're in California. We're in that Northern California region that I was showing you earlier. And so on this map, there's a lot of things happening. There's a red outline, and this is essentially the outline of a wildfire. This little flame is almost all the way gray, but this is where the fire is actively happening, and you can find updates on what's happening, shelters, those types of things. But you can also see that the air sensors that were on the purple air map also appear here. And the last thing that's really interesting is these gray lines. They just happen to be moving all across the screen. These are showing you where the wind is blowing. I was trying to find a really interesting place to show you where sometimes you can be this close to the fire, but the air might actually be worse down south because the wind is blowing down south. But I couldn't find that right now. But what you can see is that the wind is blowing from west to east. There's a fire here and the air quality around the fire.
Hey Tanya, sorry to interrupt, but the air quality right now is from prescribed burns. You're also doing, see the 129 down there? That's
Yeah.
run down where the also doing right now. That's
Thanks.
why
I was actually wondering that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So thanks for clarifying. I wasn't sure if that's what they were doing.
Boise's going to the Scott Valley.
Yeah, exactly. So you can see the air quality here. So Boise is kind of the fire that was in this region is blowing smoke this way. And you can see there's this one outdoor sensor that's just bright red when everything else isn't. So that can be a good indicator of, there's a point source there, something's happening. And Shake was able to confirm that because there's a prescribed fire right now. So that's super cool. Thanks, Shay. Lastly, there is another map that the Forest Service has. And this is actually showing you those reference grade monitors. So those like $10,000 monitors, and you can see there's a lot less in the area. And similarly, they also use the same color coding. Green is good, maroon's hazardous, and circles mean permanent monitors and triangles are temporary. And they do a similar thing with the colors. And if you click on here, it actually tells you the reading in micrograms per meter squared, so in PM 2.5. Yeah, you may be interested in this if you're wanting to look at if you want to look at data in that fine detail. But I really enjoy looking at this app on my phone, and then I also open this map in the browser. So those are 3 resources that I like to check. And next, just wanting to talk about how do we know if they're reliable. So I showed y'all the air sensor map. So when you click on one of these air sensors, actually, you can see that there is this little box that says AB with a plus and a 100%. The way that purple airs work is that there's 2 channels. And so they are shooting like rays, and they're measuring the light that is refracting or reflecting off of the particulate matter. And so they have these 2 sensors in there so that they can have redundancy and they can check each other. So in this first sensor, you can see that it has 100% A and B match. That's what it's telling you. So this is a reliable sensor to look at. In the next picture, you can see that it's a little bit phased out, and that the AB, there's a 0%. So it's like a big X, and it's telling you that channel B is not reading well. And so you want to rely on sensors that have 100% if you can. So they have the plus sign, they're solid, they look good. It means there's good data. And when they're phased out like that, that's a new feature the map has, or you can check yourself. Like I think I showed y'all one earlier that was around 70%. It's like less reliable. And then for watch duty, like I mentioned, all of these sensors are purple air sensors. So if you want to check the reliability of these, you should go back to purple air and check there. Yeah, and also just I noted it earlier, but I'll note it again that these the data here lags a bit. So if you want more accurate real time, you want to check the purple air map. And then lastly, this map with the monitors. So these monitors, in order to be on this map, they actually require maintenance, and that's something that makes the monitors, you know, kind of special. Like purple airs, we don't calibrate them. But the monitors have to be calibrated every year, and they have to go through these types of tests to be able to get on this map. So you'll know that if it's on this map, it's going to be reliable. Yes, so those are resources that I use, and that's how I interpret the air quality, you know, this color coding, and also just using these resources and these numbers and what these numbers mean. Thank you. Here's a picture of Shay. We were recently out collecting air sensors we had deployed in homes with air filters. Here's a beautiful picture of the valley with some with some smoke in there with an inversion layer. And here's Shay and I, we're replacing people's filters. So the next presentation will talk about air purification and those types of things. I just wanted to leave y'all with that to think about. Thank you. Oh,
Thank you so much, Tanya. Sorry, everyone, that I wasn't there to properly introduce Tanya, but as she mentioned, I'm out in Wichpec on this prescribed fire. So yeah, thanks so much for bringing that cultural context in also, and look forward to hearing more in the Q&A at the end.
Yeah, thank you. Here you are, right here. How convenient. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Tanya. That was great. I realized I said we'd give everybody 5 minutes at the end of each presentation for questions, and I skipped that with Dr. Surjanko. We do have a question for you, Tanya, in the chat. I'll ask that, then I'll open it up for questions for both Tanya and Dr. Surjanko for about 5 minutes before we move on to Amy's presentation. So the question we have is, do you know of a way to monitor air quality at a certain elevation? I'm thinking about after prescribed burns during inversion conditions.
Yeah, I think so that's something that the Koduk tribe's actually interested in because of these because of the prescribed and cultural fires. And so what we've been able to do, similar to the picture I showed, we haven't been able to get the air sensors connected to Wi-Fi, but if you have a battery bank and a PV module, you can kind of deploy them or set them up on a tree or somewhere if you can get to that high elevation. They do have USB memory. So if you're able to get a battery bank and a PV module and hope a bear doesn't interact or interfere with it, because that's something that we've had to learn, like, oh, bears like knocking things down. That's something that you can potentially do. Some of my students created kind of like a tripod technology where they put an air sensor in a PV module and they want to deploy it out somewhere at a higher elevation. But again, those kinds of things attract animals. And so that's kind of how we've been thinking about it. We did have some students look into, if you wanted it to be live, like with connected to the data, they've looked into having like hotspots, like low Verizon hotspots, but it really depends if there's actually signal out there. Yeah. And
We
so that
also
yeah,
have
go for it, Shay.
lots of hosts in Aboriginal territory who are at different elevations, who have power and internet, who will host them. So that's one a key thing we've done is have different hosts at different elevations on purpose, not just in the valley, so we can get those different elevations with wildfire and with prescribed burns.
And one thing just on the prescribed burns that I know the Cutting Tribe has done, and also the Cultural Fire Management Council is doing right now, is they're sending up a drone during the prescribed burn so they can see what is that mixing height of the smoke, what is the inversion doing, and kind of provide a little more information on the weather that's actually occurring, to be able to notify people, you know, if the smoke is drifting there and how long that might be happening.
Thank you. Does anybody else have some questions for either Tanya or Dr. Surjanko? I have a question. If you are interested in deploying a purple air sensor, say in your office or in your home, what would be the route for going about that?
Yeah, well, you can, if you are just an independent person that's interested in doing that, you can definitely go online and purchase them. I did mention they're around $250. If you're in our area, you can probably email me and I can get one sent to you as a part of our study to have one deployed indoors. But they're about, yeah, anyone can contact Purple Air to get an air sensor. There aren't, from what I know right now, I don't think there's any specific efforts or programs that will just send you one for doing that. But we are funded by the EPA right now, and that's our goal if you're within our region, to expand the air sensor network.
You can make them private or public. Like obviously we have interest in making them public, but we have done it in different situations where they are private, you know, because people don't want that shared.
That's great.
That's a good point too. Yeah, they don't have to be public. We have some inside the school that are private, for example, and that's in their interest that they want to know their quality, but maybe they don't want everyone else to know their quality.
Thank you. Does anybody else have questions? You can raise your hand and come online, or you can add it into the chat if you do.
I'm going to say, just Anne mentioned that, you know, Purple Air is not the only citizen smoke sensor out there. There are other brands. So give them a little equal time. Then the other thing I was going to say is, at least in Mariposa, the school district was able to do a group purchase. And so deployed smoke sensors in all their schools. And it was at a discounted rate. So working with your school district to see if they can get a discounted rate, you could at least set up sensors in areas near you, if not one in your own place.
Yeah, that's a good point, that school districts or like bulk purchases in general, we've been able to get discounts on bulk purchases, as well as, you know, if you are a part of a tribe, you know, or if you're tax exempt, that's another way to get some discounts too.
Yeah, and Anne just shared another link to those other sensors in the chat if anybody's interested in those.
Thanks, Anne. Yeah, and it's got a lot of helpful resources, and thanks for showing folks how to turn the layer on. I did not go through that step, so apologies for that.
All right, so we will move on to Amy's presentation. If anybody has any questions that come up in the meantime, please put them in the chat. I'll make sure that they get answered at the end, and we will have more time at the end for additional questions if anybody wants to come on. So I am very pleased to introduce Amy to kind of bring all this full circle. Amy McPherson is the Public Information Officer at the California Air Resources Board, and she works on public education outreach and media relations for prescribed burns and wildfire smoke. I'll let Amy take it away and teach us how to be more prepared for smoke.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to share my screen here real quick. And now, of course, it just is mad at me. Let's try doing it that way. Okay. Give me just a second. I'm going to put it full slideshow mode. Can everybody see that? I can't see you, so if somebody could verbally tell me.
Yes.
Thank you. It minimized my Zoom window, so. All right, perfect. So my name is Amy McPherson. I am a public information officer at the California Air Resources Board. I think probably folks are familiar with us, for better or for worse. Hold on, I am trying to make this go away. There we go. So CARB is our acronym, and we are responsible for protecting the public from the effects of air pollution. Also developing programs and actions to fight climate change. I've been at CARB for a little over 5 years now, leading public outreach, education, media relations efforts related to smoke from wildfires and prescribed fire. I work really closely with California's 35 local air districts, state and federal partners, as well as a wide range of stakeholders across the state and the country now, which has been really super fun to learn from other folks in other areas. And so as the state's lead air quality agency, we do provide guidance on how to prepare for and protect yourself from smoke. So we talk about being smoke ready. You'll hear US EPA use that term. It is exactly what it sounds like. It is the best way to protect yourself from smoke is to prepare for it. Don't wait until there's a fire. There's a ton of things you can do now or early on in the summer. And so you're ready to go if, God forbid, you get smoked out. And so tonight I'm going to talk about specific steps, simple things everyone can do to prepare for smoke impacts, whether or not you're experiencing them in the moment. Being prepared does not have to be expensive. You don't have to invest in a bunch of fancy equipment if that's not in your budget. There are a lot of really simple, straightforward things you can do to protect yourself from smoke. So obviously being smoke ready, especially important for sensitive groups. We heard that from our last couple of speakers. I won't spend a lot of time reiterating what they said. Let's see. So in 2020, CARB launched our Smoke Ready California campaign. It's the series of graphics. We update it every year. We get the latest information, latest research from our partner agencies, from stakeholders, and we provide, the idea here is to provide clear, simple, visual steps that anyone can take to be smoke ready. And so this is one of those infographics as an example. You can see it's a general overview of some steps you can take. And I'm gonna dig into some of these in a bit more detail. So starting with local air quality, again, we just heard a lot about this, great information. So think about air quality the way you think about the weather. You get up in the morning and you check the weather. You go to bed at night and you look at the weather for the next day. We're always, as someone who loves to be outside, I'm always checking the weather and okay, what's it gonna look like? Is my, commute to work gonna be sunny or rainy or whatnot? So start getting into the habit, if this is something that is important to you, checking the AQI as often as you check the weather or when you check the weather. You'll find, there are so many different resources and places to check the air quality and familiarize yourself with the air quality index, the color scale or the numbers if you prefer, because this is the universal agreed upon, at least within the US, way to measure air quality, and it's meant to give you very clear direction about when it's safe and when it's not. Plan your outdoor activities for times when the air quality is forecast to be good or moderate, depending on whether or not you fall in a sensitive group. Sign up for advisories from your local air district or your health department. If there's a big smoke event, many air districts or local health departments will send out notifications, and depending on where you live, it could be a mobile notification, it could be an email, it just really depends. But sign up for them because they can tell you, hey, we expect smoke impact tomorrow. And sometimes it's going to take everybody by surprise, but when there is the ability to forecast smoke impact, they'll let you know what's coming. And those are people who live and exist in your own community. So they know what's going on. They know the landscape, the topography, the geography, the meteorology, they know what's going on. So these are just a couple resources that we recommend at CARB. Air Now from US EPA, they have a fire and smoke map, as well as our mobile app, the California Smoke Spotter. And I'll get into that in a little bit here. Those are just kind of some standard places we recommend people go get AQI. All that data has been very carefully vetted. So it's great data. Some of the challenges with things like watch duty or purple air is that to some extent, because it is data from the public, you can't guarantee that every sensor's been cited properly. You can't guarantee that the data is updating as often as it might be elsewhere. So every resource has its pros and cons, but these are what we recommend people take a look at. Let's see. So our main message is always, if possible, stay indoors with the windows and doors closed if you're dealing with smoke. That is the single most effective way to protect yourself. That being said, we recognize it's not always possible. So starting with staying indoors, if you have central air, there are some things you can do to make sure that it is functioning the way it needs to be to protect you. So set your AC system to on, not to auto, and switch it to recirculation mode if you have a system that does that. Mine personally doesn't. So the difference here is if the system is on, it makes sure the air is being filtered constantly rather than auto, which will run the system, shut it off, run the system, shut it off. And every time it shuts off, that dirty air is potentially getting back in. If your system brings fresh air into your house, close the fresh air intake or operate it in recirculation mode. Not all AC systems have this feature. Like I said, mine certainly doesn't. But if it does, it's a great way to increase that protection. Sorry, little brain fart. Install a high efficiency filter. And this is going to really depend on your air conditioning unit. You need to find your manufacturer's guide or call your HVAC person. And basically you want to install as high efficiency a filter as you can for your system, as your system can handle. So based on manufacturer recommendations, if it says it's okay, the best filtration is going to be a MERV 13 filter or higher. In an older house that thankfully does have central air in Sacramento, but I have an older AC system, and I believe the highest MERV level I can put in my unit so that it still functions properly and doesn't overheat and die is a MERV, I think it's an 8 or a 9. So I would love to put a 13 in there, but I know I can't because my system can't handle it. So do your research, and as high as you can get without breaking your AC, go with that. Also, so if you don't have central air, which is we hear from a lot of people who don't, which is very common as well, consider using a CARB certified portable air cleaner. These are devices, they vary in size. They can clean, depending on what size you get, it can clean a small room or a big room. It will say on the box what the clean air delivery rate is, CADR, which I did not put on the slide and I apologize. And that will tell you how many square feet it will clean efficiently. And you always want to make sure you're buying a filter that has a CADR that is appropriate to the room size you're putting it in. So anyway, consider using one. They can run anywhere from like $75 for a small, $75 for a small one to a few $100s for larger ones. Do not run swamp coolers or whole house fans. They will just circulate bad air and they won't clean anything, and it's not helpful at all. The other thing that anyone can do, whether or not you have air conditioning, but especially for folks without it, is to prepare what we call a cleaner airspace. And so you're going to pick a room that fits everyone in the house, comfy enough for you to spend time in. When we say time, we mean potentially hours, if not the better part of a couple of days if it's really, really bad. And we say comfy. No one's going to love being jammed in a family room with their entire family for days on end, but use your best judgment. Pick a room, ideally one that you can close off, that has doors, that you can contain the air within it. Close the windows and doors. Obviously, don't block the exits for fire safety reasons. And do what you can to filter the air. Use a portable air cleaner. Use a DIY air cleaner, which we'll talk about in a minute. If you can do one or the other, that's going to help immensely. avoid activities that are going to create smoke or other particles inside. So burning candles, using your gas stove, vacuuming, burning incense, I don't know, smoking, you're just going to make the air dirtier, and that is still generating particulate matter, which is the same thing that's in smoke. Run fans or your air conditioning on recirculate if you have it. You can also, if you have dust in the room, or you're afraid that there's like a draft under your door, you can use a damp cloth, a mop, a towel, damp towel to scrape some of those particles and keep them from floating around. And so the idea here is that by focusing on one room, one area, and cleaning the air there becomes more manageable than trying to clean the air in the entire house. And everyone has a safe place to be during these periods of intense smoke. And ideally, it's also, if money is a concern, it's a lot less expensive than trying to figure out a solution for your whole home. DIY air cleaners. These have become super popular in recent years. And this is great if you don't have central air, or if you just want a different alternative to running your central air. So they're typically made with a box fan and some MERV 13 air filters. This graphic shows 3 of the most popular designs that are used for these. US EPA actually tested these designs. One of their research teams found that all of them are very effective at reducing smoke particles. So as much as if you're skeptical about DIY, if you put these together correctly, they're very effective. You can also up the effectiveness by adding like a cardboard shroud, which are the yellow pieces on this graphic. It just it makes sure the air is going in one direction and really ensures that what's coming out into the room is really well filtered. You can also use thicker MERV 13 filters. Most typically you'll find them, they're about 1 inch thick, but I think you can buy up to like 4-inch thick filters, which obviously the thicker, the more filtration. All 3 of these are going to clean the air in your house. EPA's research did find that the models with more filters, so this one that's labeled best, for example, which has 4 or 5, depending on how you build it, obviously that are going to be more effective at removing that small fine particulate matter from the air. Now, talking a little bit more about these, costs can really vary depending on what model you want to put together, what materials you have on hand, or what you need. Typically, if you're buying all the materials and you're starting from scratch, the cost ranges from about $45 to $75, and that figure came a couple of years ago. So take that with a grain of salt and know it may be a little bit different now, because that's when they did that research. Let's see, some important tips. Only use certified box fans that have a UL or ETL logo on them. So they're manufactured in 2012 or newer. You'll see the UL or ETL logos on the box. What that means is they have safety features built in, namely a fuse in the electrical plug to prevent overheating or an electrical fire if someone knocks the fan over. So the worst case scenario would be to set up this air filter in your home to filter wildfire smoke, and then you start a fire by knocking it over because you're using an old janky fan. So ideally use a newer model that has that UL or ETL logo either on the fan or on the box. Obviously use filters rated MERV 13 or higher. They provide the best filtration. Again, that will be on the packaging. Whenever possible, filters should be mounted to the back of the fan with the arrow printed on the filter pointed toward the fan. So basically the arrow on the filter, and you'll see it when you open it, it's usually on the side, should be pointing in the same direction as the airflow is from the fan, so that you're not creating any unnecessary, what's the word I'm looking for? Conflict is not the right word, but you want the air to be going in the right direction to be filtered. Highly recommend avoiding fans that have like where the motor housing or the power cords are on the middle of the back of the fan, because that's where you're going to put your filter. So if you can find one where it comes out of like the bottom or the side or somewhere that's not the middle of the back of the fan, you're going to have a really hard time creating a seal with that filter if the motor housing is right there. Replace the filters when they get dirty. Once you create this, you have to keep an eye on it. If it gets dirty or if it develops an odor, it needs to be replaced. The EPA's research found that these particular types, these DIY air cleaners, almost completely ineffective with dirty filters. So at that point, you're just pushing dirty air through your house again. And highly recommend having some extra filters on hand so that if you're sitting there and you notice it's dirty, you don't have to get up and go out in the smoke to buy new filters to replace them. So always have, you know, I'd say at least one set of enough filters to replace it once or twice if you need to. And how often you will have to do that will really depend on how much smoke there is. So people who have to be outside for long periods of time when there's heavy smoke may want to consider an N95 respirator mask. There are a couple of things about these that you need to know. Wearing one can make it harder to breathe, especially for people with lung or heart conditions. So those folks should always check with their doctor before using one. We recommend purchasing these early in fire season. In the spring, buy a box, have them handy, put a couple in, make sure you have some in your house, your vehicle, your purse, your office, wherever you're going to be, so that you have one handy if a smoke event occurs quickly. If you purchase N95 masks, make sure they are NIOSH approved. So NIOSH, the National Institute of, I want to say, Occupational Safety and Health, they are the ones who test the effectiveness of these masks and approve them. So if it is NIOSH certified, it will have that word NIOSH, N-I-O-S-H, on the mask, on the box, with usually with a little identification number. And that means that that model has been tested and proved to filter up to 90, or I believe it's 95% of the small particulate matter from the air. So you know it's going to work appropriately if it's, and the other key is if it fits appropriately. You need to choose a size and a model that fits your face and has no gaps. You put one strap above and one strap below your ear. So one around kind of the back of your neck, one on the back of your head. Do not cross them. That will create a gap kind of at the side of your face here. Over your nose and under your chin snugly. You're going to pinch the little metal bar on your nose so that it fits to your nose. And then when you breathe in, the mask should collapse a little bit and you shouldn't feel any air coming in around the side. And so those are all real simple ways to make sure that you have it fitted appropriately. There are KN95s out there too. Those are not, they are not tested the way N95s are, but they are, I think, pretty effective. The main difference being they typically have ear straps instead of these ones that go around the back of your head. So they are harder to create a seal to adequately filter the air. But if you don't have access to N95s, those are a decent alternative. We do talk about a little bit evacuation. Hold on. We hear about the importance of having an evacuation plan in the event of a wildfire all the time. So if you're putting one together, there's some things you can do to protect yourself from smoke when you're in, particularly when you're in the car. So some things to think about: stay in your vehicles with the windows and doors closed. I remember during the, I forget which fire, but anyway, there was a line of traffic in Lake Tahoe and everyone was out of their cars, walking around the street, chatting with each other. And all I could think was, you're all breathing in smoke. Oh my gosh. I know no one wants to sit in their car for that long, especially if they're in a line of traffic. I get it. Keep your windows closed, keep your doors closed, stay in your car, run your vehicle air conditioning on recirculate so you're not pulling more dirty air into the car. You can wear an N95 while you're traveling if you're at an emergency shelter. And this is typically included with most evacuation plan advice, but make sure, especially if you have a respiratory condition, bring your inhalers and your medication or a heart condition. So those are just some things to keep in mind if, God forbid, you have to evacuate. So another option for folks, if you can't create a cleaner airspace in your home, is to find a clean air center. So clean air centers provide a safe place for people to go during wildfire smoke events or just poor air quality, periods of really poor air quality. So earlier this summer, CARB launched the California Clean Air Centers map. It's an online map we created in collaboration with the local air quality control district. And so the idea here is to provide information to people about the location and services offered at clean air centers in local communities all across the state. Oops, sorry, I forgot I was on a slide and not the actual website. So there are generally two types of clean air centers: permanent, which are in bright blue on the map there, facilities that provide filtered air at all times when they're during normal operating hours. So typically places that have central air. Temporary clean air centers, which are in dark blue. You'll see some up, it looks like in Placer County and up towards Tahoe right now. And this was earlier today that I took this screen grab. So those facilities provide a dedicated space with filtered air, but only when there is a smoke event or another kind of air quality emergency. So some temporary clean air centers are going to be here full time. Some are going to disappear when they're not activated. So if you look on the map and you're like, I don't see anything, it could be that a temporary clean air center just hasn't been activated yet. And again, because it is a newer map, we're still getting the word out about it. So we're hoping that it will, as more and more communities start to put together clean air center programs, that this map will fill out quite a bit more. And you'll see when you click on one on the left or on the right-hand side, you've got an address, a phone number, contact information. Either a phone number or a website is required. So there will always be a way to contact the center. And there's lots of information that the operators can include, including capacity, whether or not it provides cool air or also functions as a cooling center. Additional information if, say, it's a senior center that's only open to seniors, or if they have free Wi-Fi and they want you to know about it. There's a whole section where they can, or if pets are allowed, they'll tell you, as well as operational hours for obvious reasons. So the website link is at the bottom there, and it's on my last slide. I can also make sure it gets in the chat if somebody hasn't beat me to it already. So that's new. And the other cool thing about this is right now, this is just on the web, but in the next few weeks here, it will also be incorporated in our mobile app, which is called California Smoke Spotter. So this was something that CARB launched in 2021 as part of our efforts to help the state balance air quality protection with fire protection and land management goals. So prescribed fire and smoke impacts from that are actually the primary focus of this app. But it was expanded to include wildfire information a year later in 2022 because we got a lot of feedback from the public saying we want both. So that's kind of the route we've taken. Some of the key features are on the screen here. We have 72-hour smoke and AQI forecast. We have separate smoke forecasts for prescribed fire and for wildfire. We have detailed fire information. You can click on either a wildfire icon or a prescribed fire icon and get more information, as well as, like in the case of wildfires, links to the appropriate incident management page. All of our smoke ready information, those infographics and that information I just went over, is also in the app. And it's all available in Spanish as well. In the app, there's a little translation icon in the upper left-hand corner there. Also not listed on the screen, you can set up personalized alerts for multiple locations if you want to monitor your house and your kid's school or your office or your mom's house, or, you know, we all have different places we care about. It includes AQI data, but only for PM 2.5. So if you're looking for information on PM 10 or ozone, we do recommend using AirNow for that. And then I think that was it for, and like I said, we're going to add clean air centers on as an additional layer on the map here in the next couple of weeks. So that will be another really cool resource. And so I've listed the three things that I went over from CARB, as well as the fire and smoke map from AirNow. And the EPA also has some really great fact sheets on their website, and there's a link here. All different topics, indoor air filtration, how smoke and extreme heat interact, how to use and cite an air sensor like the purple airs that Tanya was talking about properly, how to protect your pets or your livestock, So they've got a lot of, they're very text heavy fact sheets, so I didn't include them in the presentation, but really a lot of great information there. And so I think that's it for my presentation. I will stop yakking and see if I can find my menu here to actually see what's going on. Hold please. There we go. No, that's not okay. There we go. Sorry, it's confusing the heck out of me. So yeah. I see it looks like Cleo has his hand up.
Yeah, thank you so much for your presentation. And I'm just curious, like you talk.
Oh no, did he freeze for everyone else or just me?
Yeah.
I think he's
And kind
having
of how
Wi-Fi
you're-
issues. He's in a remote area.
Cleo, you're
I'll
cutting
put it in
out.
the chat. I'll put it
Okay,
in the chat.
Okay,
Thanks, Cleo.
I'll look for it.
In the meantime, we do have a question from Barb. She asked, is it possible to prompt the opening of temporary clean air centers during good prescribed burn windows? For example, the large unhoused population in the Santa Cruz area have nowhere to go in the fall when a lot of good fire occurs.
That is a great question. That would be a great question for whoever is operating the clean air centers. So CARB doesn't actually operate the clean air centers. We're just aggregating the information on the map right now. And so clean air centers, I wish I had a simple answer for you, but they're typically a lot of local air districts help manage those programs, or it's like your local government. So I'd say a good starting point would be check in with your local air district as well as your local health department to find out if there are clean air centers set up in those communities and if that's something they would be willing to activate them for. I think that would be fantastic and would help us get some of that social buy-in for prescribed fire that we're trying to get from a smoke perspective.
So Amy, I guess the question would be for CARB, because I'm happy in my former life, I would be happy to open a clean air center for a prescribed fire if it were indicated. Does CARB can we use CARB grant funding to support a clean air center during a burn?
Like the prescribed fire grant funding?
Yeah.
That is a really good question. I don't know the answer, but I'm going to write it down and ask. Because a lot of the clean air centers currently on the map were funded through a $5 million pilot program. And so that money's been exhausted, and that funded largely portable air cleaners so that places could set up these temporary shelters. But that is a really interesting idea and is the first I've heard of it, but thank you. I will
like we numerous prescribed burn grants.
Mhm.
And it
That's
just
a
seems to me like we should be able to use that for that.
Great idea. I will take that back to the team. Thank you. Okay. I see.
So we have a question from Cleo. Yeah. I'm curious how CARB is balancing public health and economic impacts of smoke with the benefits of prescribed fire. For example, smoke concerns from grape growers shutting down virtually all prescribed burning in Sonoma County last year.
Also a really good question and an ongoing issue for sure. So I'm trying to think. Public health and economic. Oh, correct. I think I know I haven't been involved in any of those specific conversations, so I can't speak to that specifically. I can say that we are very supportive of the state's goals in terms of ramping up the use of prescribed fire, and we're doing what we can as to facilitate discussions, to upgrade our system that tracks all the prescribed fires and the smoke management plans. I know we are trying to make sure there's as many burn day opportunities for air districts and local land managers to use for prescribed fire, increase the number of burn days that permissive burn days, if you will. I know that those conversations are happening for sure. I think about that is a good example of that one. And there's some forest areas that are very opposed to prescribed fire for similar reasons. And I think that's going to be, the conversations have started, but I think it's going to take a while to get everybody where they need to be, unfortunately. And I think things like Eric's idea of, okay, maybe we can use some of this funding to create a place for people to go. I'm working as much as I can with land managers to encourage public notification and public outreach. I'm going to be working with the air districts here shortly to create a series of radio PSAs about prescribed fire and smoke and how you can prepare and how you can, you know, why it's important and how you can be ready for it so that we can have what we need on the landscape, but also protect public health. So conversations are certainly happening. Getting the social buy-in for this can be challenging. I will fully admit. Ooh, love that, Lenya. That's awesome.
Eric or Tanya, do you want to add anything to that? All right, we do have another question. How would you start a clean air center in your community?
I was gonna.
Wow, that's up for everybody. I should throw that out there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Go for it, Eric.
all right, yeah, because that's, you know, as Amy pointed out, that's pretty much local government. Though certainly there's no reason that a community center that was hosted by a faith-based or other community community-based organization couldn't do it. And so really it's important to be willing to have a place where you're willing to have people overnight, and then looking for the right building, looking for a place, like Amy says, relatively airtight, has then, you know, an anteroom, if you will, so you can have people go in and out without bringing and training in a lot of smoke. And so finding the right building is probably the most important thing. And where I would start is figuring out who in your county does what's called mass care. Those are the people who set up shelters for fires, and looking at their shelter list, either to find an acceptable clean air center or to you know, identify places that aren't good, that don't have the qualities. Because they, you know, for us, Red Cross is our mass care provider. They survey all the available mass care sites, whether it's schools, churches, etc. But other counties have different surveyors, whether it's the county themselves or a third-party organization.
Good point about the like the mass care piece or your local office of emergency services, whatever that is. We had during the park fire up in Chico, they had the evacuation center, and I forget who was managing that, but they contacted the Butte County Air District and said, hey, can we get some portable air cleaners in here and make this also a clean air center? And so the air district was able to deploy the portables and create that clean air center within the emergency the fire evacuation center, and we were able to get it on the clean air center map, so people knew where to go. And when that location moved, we updated it on the map. So yeah, that's a really good point.
That's great. Does anybody else have any questions? You can raise your hand, add it in the chat. Probably just come right out and ask it. We still have about 2 minutes before I want to wrap this up and send out a poll. Cleo, did you have another question?
No, sorry. Let me try to take my hand down. I had to get on my phone because my other thing wasn't leaving.
All right, well, let's all give a big virtual round of applause for Dr. Surjanko, Tanya, Shay, and Amy. I'm really excited that we were able to host you all tonight, and I'm sure that it will continue to help other people be more prepared for smoke, both here and on the YouTube channel.